Hello everyone, I am Srishti from Decipher IAS with one more chapter of economic survey, that is Preferential Trade Agreements. As we all know that while remaining committed to multilateralism, India, like many other countries, has negotiated a series of free trade agreements, notably with trading partners in Asia. Since the mid-2000s, India's FTAs have doubled to about 42 today. FTAs have led to increased imports and exports, although the imports has been greater. The average effect of an FTA is to increase the overall trade by about 50% over roughly 4 years. The ASEAN FTA has had the greatest impact, possibly because tariff reduction by India has been greater under it. The results also suggest a bigger impact on metals on the importing side and textiles on the exporting side. Now let's see the background for the same. Preferential trade agreements have been increasing, especially since the establishment of World Trade Organization (WTO) in 1994. As of 1st December 2015, the WTO had received a notification of no less than 619 PTAs, of which 413 PTAs were already in force. Clearly, then PTAs are popular. But are they economical? Are they beneficial? More specifically, have the PTAs signed by India been good for the country? We will discuss the evidence and considering the implications for trade strategy going forward. Between 2008 and 2012, PTAs grew at an average year-on-year rate of 24%. All WTO members except Mongolia have concluded at least one PTA, while some such as European Union, Chile and Mexico have concluded more than 20. In the mid-1990s, about 75% PTAs were regional, and by 2003 this share had dropped to about 50%. Within the broad category of PTAs, one can distinguish 5 forms, with each subsequent arrangement being a deeper form of integration requiring more coordination and a greater loss of autonomy. First one is Partial Scope Agreement, PSA. A PSA is only partial in nature, scope, meaning it allows for trade between countries on a small number of goods. Free trade agreements. A free trade agreement is a preferential arrangement in which members reduce tariffs on their trade. Customs union. A customs union is a free trade agreement in which members apply a common external tariff, CET, scheduled to imports from non-members. Common market, CM. A common market is a customs union where movement of factors of production is relatively free amongst the members' countries. Economic union, EU. An economic union is a common market where member countries coordinate macroeconomic and exchange rate policies. Now let's talk about India and free trade agreements. In addition to its long-standing commitment to multilateralism under WTO agreements and in line with the global trends, India has made use of FTAs as a key component of its trade and foreign policy, especially from 2003 to 2004 onwards. India has mainly focused on partnering with other Asian countries and in goods more so than in services. Within Asia, India has signed bilateral FTAs with Sri Lanka in 1998, Afghanistan in 2003, Thailand in 2004, Singapore in 2005, Bhutan in 2006, Nepal in 2009, Korea in 2009, Malaysia in 2011 and Japan in 2011. There have also been 2 regional trade agreements, South Asian Free Trade Agreements SAFTA in year 2004 and Indian Association of Southeast Asian Nations Agreement ASEAN in 2010. Outside Asia, FTAs have been agreed with Chile in 2006 and Mercosur in 2004. An earlier study on FTAs commissioned by Ministry of Finance and authored by Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, notes that there are differences in the coverage of products and degree of integration across recent FTAs. For example, the India-Korea Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement (CEPA) contains chapters on origins, procedures, telecommunications and audiovisual co-production, but these are not included in India-Japan CEPA. On the other hand, the India-Japan agreement has chapters on technical regulation standards and conformity assessment procedures and sanitary and phytosanitary measures, government procurement and improvement of business environment. But these chapters are not included in India-Korea CEPA. In other words, all FTAs are not the same, and these differences need to be recognized when analyzing their impact. Moving forward, let's know about mega regionalism. Recently, PTAs have begun to change into mega regional agreements, which would encompass a large share of world GDP and trade. Mega regionals, in other words, are PTAs on steroids. Two major mega regionals are the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has been signed but yet not ratified by the member countries, and Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership (TTIP), which is currently being negotiated. The TPP comprises 12 member countries: Australia, Brunel, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, United States and Vietnam. The TPP will cover 40% of global GDP and 33% of world trade. TTIP, when concluded, will be a PTA between the United States and European Community of 27 member states and representing 30% of global merchandise trade and about 40% of world trade and services and nearly half of the global GDP. India is not the part of these groupings, but it has its own PTAs with members of TPP and TTIP and will hence be outside these large trade zones. The World Bank estimates that by 2030, TPP will raise the member country GDP by 0.4 to 10% and by 1.1% on a GDP weighted average basis, mainly owing to the measures of reducing non-tariff barriers. Vietnam and Malaysia would be amongst the TPP member countries benefiting the most. At the same time, the bank also estimates that non-members will suffer a marginal reduction in GDP. For example, activity in Korea and Thailand could be set back as a result of shrinking market access and greater competition in exports market. Some non-member countries such as Russia could benefit because standards in export market will be harmonized. In India's case, the effect on exports is marginally positive, but its effect on the country's GDP is about 0.2%. And there is also suggested an increase of 0.3% in real income for members and a decrease of 0.1% for India by 2020. So, let's understand to PTA or not to PTA. Against this background of rapid increase of FTAs and the emergence of mega regionalism, a review of India's FTAs is overdue. Any reduction in tariff barriers should encourage trade between the partners by offering greater market access for firms and encouraging specialization with the industrial subsectors. However, the impact of an FTA on trade balance is unclear, as it may favor one region over the other. Similarly, the impact of welfare can be uncertain. That's because FTAs, in contrast to unilateral trade liberalization, give rise not only to beneficial trade creation but also to trade diversion. Trade diversion occurs when tariff preferences offered under an FTA causes a shift of imports from firms in non-FTA member countries to less efficient firms within the trade bloc, which now becomes competitive due to tariff reliefs. FTAs therefore require a careful empirical analysis, as their implications for the country's policy are wide-ranging. Do they actually improve welfare? Are the effects heterogeneous across the different types of FTAs between imports and exports or across subsectors? Before we attempt to know the answer of these questions, we briefly review the literature for the India. Impact of Indian-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. A cross-country analysis was done using applied general equilibrium modeling framework, which concludes that the trade balance for India after the ASEAN FTA became even more negative. In terms of exports, India obtained the largest market access in Cambodia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. Impact of analysis of India's free trade agreements. Using a before and after comparison method for selected commodities under selected FTAs, it is concluded that the country has not effectively made use of the trade agreements into increase of exports. There is significant increase in imports through the most favored nations route, and relaxation of structural and regulatory factors to promote exports is recommended. Let's talk of India-Korea CEPA. Meeting stakeholders, regulatory bodies and officials in India and Korea, this was observed that a heterogeneous impact on exports is there. Economy-wide impact of the trade integration between Japan and India. By a computable general equilibrium analysis using a CGE model, it was estimated a marginal increase in output growth for India due to tariff reductions. Contrary to earlier studies, the estimate of greater exports from India and positive net welfare for both the countries was found. Reassessing the impact of ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement. Using a gravity model, it was estimated that there is an increase in GDP and bilateral trade between the two regions. One of the biggest barriers to trade according to the study are distance costs. Empirical framework and its flaws. A second reason to review India's PTAs is that most studies on Indian FTAs are based on a simple analysis, a before-after study, which compares outcomes based on the pre and post effects of an FTA. The drawback of such an approach is that it fails to isolate the effect of a policy change from trends which would have happened even without a policy change. For example, trade between India and Korea could have grown post-2010 even in the absence of the FTA because of the other reasons, including factors such as demand and supply conditions in the two countries. The gravity model, on the other hand, relates bilateral trade flows between countries to country-specific characteristics. The two most basic axioms that trade flows between the countries are directly proportional to the size of two countries as measured by GDP and inversely proportional to the distance between them. Distance is a proxy for all the trade costs between the countries, including not just transport costs, but also those related to language, currency, policy, etc. The idea being that countries having a similar language, currency, political system or colonial links are more likely to trade with each other because all the costs other than transportation will be lower. Now let's see the basic facts and trends. For the purpose of this analysis, we focus on three major FTA partners: ASEAN, Korea and Japan. We refer to these nations as FTA countries. The other countries are called non-FTA since the bulk of trade with such countries is not under the FTA with India. Before presenting the main results, let's discuss the broad trends. As expected, post-FTA growth rate of exports and imports in FTA countries is higher than non-FTA countries. Within the set of FTA countries, ASEAN growth rate of trade after the enactment of FTA is much higher than the other FTA countries. Simple averages calculated at a 6-digit product level, pooling export and import pre-FTA tariffs on India's imports and its exports to the partner countries were similar for trade with FTA and non-FTA countries, that is about 8.5%. Unsurprisingly, there has been a greater reduction in tariffs for FTA countries with an average decline about 3.5% points in tariff rates, mainly on account of reductions in Indian imports tariffs. The ASEAN FTA has seen the largest decline in Indian import tariffs, and the main results, while considering the empirical findings regarding the impact of FTAs on trade. increased trade. The overall effect on the trade of an FTA is positive and statistically significant. The cumulative effect between the year of the FTA and 2013 on the trade with ASEAN, Japan, and Korea is approximately equal to 50%. This is substantial. After testing whether India's increased trade with FTA is due to diversion of imports from more efficient non-FTA countries, it has been found that it is not the case. Persistent effects. Within a year of the agreement coming into force, the effect of FTAs become positive and significant, even increasing in the subsequent few years, indicating that the anticipatory effects of an FTA are minimal, especially for ASEAN FTA. While ASEAN and the Korean FTA show statistically significant and positive effects on trade values, the effect of Japanese FTA on the trade is not statistically significant. However, this does not imply that Japanese FTA did not have any effect. It could still have had an effect on specific product lines. The ASEAN FTA does not seem to have the biggest trade impact, which makes sense since the arrangement saw the greatest reduction in the Indian import tariffs, especially for imports. FTA effects on exports and imports separately are of the order of 27% and 63% respectively. On the import side, the result is robust to adding Singapore into the sample. In the case of ASEAN FTA, the country has benefited on both sides of trade flows with a statistically significant 33% increase in exports and 79% increase in imports. The effect of Korean FTA is insignificant, whereas the Japan FTA has had a significantly negative effect on exports, a fall of 18% and statistically zero effects on the imports. The effect of FTAs on imports as a share of total trade is statistically 7% higher as compared to non-FTA countries, especially for metals and textiles. On the import side, a 10% reduction in FTA tariffs for metals and machinery increases imports by 1.4% and 2.1% respectively. Compared to other products from FTA or all products from non-FTA countries, this is a marginal effect of importing metals and machines from FTA countries relative to all the products from non-FTA countries. Disaggregated effects. As expected, a 10% reduction in the tariff increases overall trade by 3.1%, irrespective of whether the reduction occurs unilaterally or preferentially. By checking the robustness of our earlier result by controlling for numerous confounding factors on the exporting and importing side, the trade elasticity reduces to 2.7% for a 10% tariff reduction, but continues to have a strong significant effect. While marginal effect of FTA tariff reduction is negative, on average FTA tariff reduction causes trade to go up by 2.9%. A 10% decrease in unilateral tariffs increases exports and imports by 0.7% and 1.2% respectively. But in the case of ASEAN, for example, a 10% reduction in the tariffs translates to a reduction from 6.1% to 5.5% on the export side, but a much larger reduction from 11.3% to 10.2% in import duties. It was found that FTA based reductions have the same impact as non-FTA based ones. This is a 10% import side reduction in the tariffs has the same effect in the FTA and non-FTA cases. Imports increases by 0.9%. Similarly, a 10% reduction on the export side has the same effect in both the cases, an average increase of 0.5%. Conclusion. Let's conclude it. Let's know policy implications. These are results, preliminary results we can say. More work is required, much work is required, needed to enrich these analyses and extend it to services. Without that, it is difficult to come to any definitive conclusion about the overall impact of the India's FTAs. With the caveat that results yield the following implications. India's FTA have worked exactly as might be expected. They have increased trade with FTA countries more than would have happened otherwise. Increased trade has been more on the import than export side. Most likely because India maintains relatively high tariffs and hence had a larger tariff reduction than its FTA partners. The trade increases have been much greater with ASEAN than other FTAs, and they have been greater in certain industries such as metals on their import side. On the export side, FTAs have led to increased dynamism in apparels, especially in Asian markets. This is consistent whether one looks at aggregated partner level effects or at disaggregated partner product level effects. Going forward, the big question for India is whether to continue negotiating FTAs, and if so, with whom. A related and perhaps even bigger question is how India should position itself relative to the new mega regionalism agreements. Multilateral trade liberalization remains, of course, the best way forward. But the WTO process seems to have been overtaken by preferential trade agreements. Against this background, India has a strategic choice to make: to play the same PTA game as everyone else or to be excluded from this process. The results of our preliminary analysis suggest that Indian PTAs do increase trade without apparently leading to inefficient trade. In the current context of slowing demand and excess capacity with threats of circumvention of trade rules, progress on FTAs must be combined with strengthening India's ability to respond with WTO consistent measures such as anti-dumping and conventional duties, safeguard measures and others. No matter what India ultimately decides, one thing is clear: analytical and other preparatory work must begin in earnest to prepare India for a mega regional world. With this, we conclude here. So, thank you for watching. Please do comment in the comment box, subscribe us, like us and share us on the Facebook. For many more things, please visit our website decipheris.com, and for any query related to subjects or suggestions, you may please write to us. Till the next, enjoy, take care and bye-bye.